You probably don't know that expression, Kris. Smize. But anyway, hi, everybody, and welcome back to Best Concordia Podcast. This is episode 2, and we are super excited to be back with you guys. I am joined here in the Ethnography Lab by my fabulous producers, Kris Millett and Marie Turcotte. Hey, guys. And over in the corner sipping her tea is Elizabeth White, the coordinator of the Ethnography Lab. Hey. And today I have a question. And that question is, what do a box and a bag, an Inuit radio show, and the land beneath our feet have in common? Well, they are all part of the conversation I had this week with my guests, Marie-Eve Drouin Gagne and Sarah Breitkreutz, both PhD students in the Social and Cultural Analysis program here at Concordia University. And what was cool about these two interviews was that Marie-Eve and Sarah both talk about non-traditional ethnographic methods, thinking outside the box in terms of epistemology and ontology, and also literally outside the box. So in this episode, we're going to hear about how their work is pushing the boundaries of ethnographic methods, challenging the way that we think about research, and the very position that we occupy as researchers in our communities. So I sat down with Marie-Eve to talk about her research, and she threw down some dope rhymes to describe her work. Say it rhyming. Say it for me in the rhyming way.
Indigenous higher education as a tool for decolonization.
Yes. All right. Throw down some rhymes, Marie-Eve. And we sat down in the Ethno Lab here, and we started off, and I decided that I would ask her some tough questions, because why not start off an interview with tough questions? That's the best way to get your guests comfortable and get them talking, right? Yeah, sure, we'll go with that. So I decided that I would ask her about working in Indigenous communities when, in fact, you yourself are not an Indigenous person. And here's what she had to say.
So I always, anytime, even at the beginning of my class, because I'm teaching too, so even at the beginning of my class, or when I do a presentation, when I go for a conference, anything, I always begin by presenting who I am, which is good practice. Yeah. And that includes situating myself as a settler in Montreal. Mm-hmm. So I was born and raised in Montreal. Okay. And I've always been a settler in this land, but that's something that I ignored for most of my life. So that's always also something that I say. Right. Because it's not part of the kind of education that we receive. It's not, I never learned that this is Mohawk territory. I never learned about these things, really. Yeah. Until when I finished my cégep, my mom was doing international work in Bolivia. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't know what I wanted to do. Didn't know if I wanted to go to university. What did I want to do? So I decided to travel there. Okay. And because I wanted to travel, but also since my mom was living there, I was like, I can't stay there and actually, I don't know, maybe volunteer over there, and I get to know the country differently than just tourism. Yes. But Bolivia it's a country that 60% of the population identify as being Indigenous. Okay. So there's like a very deep presence of Indigenous cultures in Bolivia. Even like Aymara, Quechua are talked still a lot by a lot of people, so you can hear it everywhere. And so it's very different from the context here. Right. So anyway, and I ended up staying there for a long time. I even did part of my undergrad there, like one semester. And people over there were always asking me, what about the Indigenous peoples of Canada? Right. And I was like, I have absolutely no idea. Like, I didn't know. Yeah. And that really began, like, creating that, I felt ignorant. And I was like, oh, my God, how is it that I have no idea? And I'm here in Bolivia and, like, learning about, Indigenous peoples of Bolivia and all of that. But, like, I don't even know about my own, Right. Position. And also in Bolivia is where I began like being a bit more aware about colonial processes. Mm-hmm. And do you think that ignorance, that not knowing, that not learning, to me that seems like that is part of the colonial project, right? Totally. Yeah. Erasing, right? So erasing the presence of Indigenous peoples is part of the colonial process and project. Now in Bolivia, they haven't been able to erase them, but the whole idea of the society as being like a mestizo society and everything, which is quite different from here, is another way.
What kind of society?
Mestizo, which is kind of a métis.
Okay.
So the whole idea that, indigenous peoples are integrated in the society,
right,
in a way, even though the society is still a very Western nation state in many ways.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the discourse happening in South America, which is not the case here.
Right. Yeah.
Here it's a different erasure. It's like let's just not talk about it.
Yeah.
Now we're talking more and more about it, especially with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and all of these things that have been happening. I think, it makes it more visible. But for a long time it wasn't, and at least in my whole education, it was not visible. Indigenous peoples were not visible in my education. It's not something that we talked about.
Yeah.
So, I'm taking all of these detours to answer your question. But to answer your question, I always situate myself as being a settler.
Yeah.
I know my family. I went back and I know we are French descendant for like several generations. So I know I'm a descendant from settlers too.
Right.
So that's how I position myself.
Okay.
But it's a complex thing also. Like it's not just a given. It's not just about saying, oh, I'm a settler here. It's also about what does that mean to to assume a settler identity, because it comes also, I think, personally with responsibilities and in terms of decolonizing. And so where do I situate myself as a settler? And how can I be an ally in terms of decolonizing and unsettling, or now that we know that this is problematic, but thinking differently about, and also relating differently with the land, but also with the indigenous peoples of this land. So here, Mohawk people, but also throughout Quebec and Canada.
And so then that sort of brings us to your work, which I imagine is part of how you address this. How do I be an ally? How do I contribute to what's happening to these processes that are happening to sort of decolonize or what have you? So how did you, so you went to school in Bolivia for a semester. Yeah. You were learning about indigenous peoples there. How did you and people were asking you and you realized there was a lack of information there. Yeah. So then was that sort of what pushed you in this direction to then say, okay, well now I'm going to go back and start uncovering this stuff in Canada?
So when I came back from Bolivia to finish my BA, I was in anthropology at UDM, and I decided I would take like all courses possible on indigenous peoples, and so I even took like a class here at Concordia. Back then it was like Haudenosaunee spirituality. I took a class at UQAM on indigenous religions. I can't remember the exact title of the class. I took in anthropology at UDM. I took Marie-Pierre Bousquet's class on indigenous peoples of the East, Northeast. And so anyway, everything that I could, I took.
Right.
But it was still really thin. I felt like it was still like really not. And it was always also about like kind of studying indigenous peoples as an object of study, or like, you know what I mean? It wasn't, in all of these classes, the only class that I had an indigenous person leading the class was the class here at Concordia on Haudenosaunee spirituality, and it was co-taught. So you had like the professor who was officially assigned the class. Yeah. I can't remember her name, but she was really fantastic. Anyway, that's too bad that I don't remember her name right now. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Not to say that I'm old and that I took forever to finish everything, but it's been a long time. Anyway, and she was co-teaching it with. If I remember well his name, Brian Deere from Ganawage. Yeah. And it was a great class. It was fantastic.
And he was the one who sort of led the class, the professor?
They were really co-teaching it.
Okay.
Yeah. But he would lead like different parts of it. He also brought us to Ganawage. We went to the Longhouse with him. Anyway, we talked about the Turo Wampum. We talked about like all the basics that I still have today in terms of understanding this land, in terms of Mohawk land. And anyway, that was a great class to be in.
And that was when you were doing your master's degree?
No, that was at the end of my BA.
Oh, okay.
And I was in transition because when I came back the semester I did abroad in Bolivia was kind of late in my BA. Mm-hmm. I kind of returned to Bolivia to study there. And anyway, I did one semester, then I came back, and then I was almost finishing, and I wanted to go in religious studies instead of anthropology for my MA. Uh-huh. And I was accepted with the condition of like doing what we call a propédeutique. So I don't know how you call that. It's like, because my BA was not in religious studies, I kind of had to take more classes.
Okay.
But I had not finished my BA yet, so what I did is like every class that I could take on Indigenous peoples, but also relating to like religions or like spirituality or all of that, I would take them so that I would be able to enter the MA in religious studies.
Okay. And then did you do the MA in religious studies?
Yeah, I did my MA in religious studies with my co-supervisor was in sociology at UDM too, so like it was a religious studies, I guess.
Who was your supervisor?
So
you had co-supervisors who?
I had a co-supervisor. So I had Solange Lefebvre at the Department of Religious Studies. Actually, it's the faculty, but anyway. Mm-hmm. And I had Monsieur Paul Sabourin, as my co-supervisor for my MA. Yeah.
Cool. Shout out to them. Hey.
Yeah, I guess. I guess they were happy that I finished, because it took me 4 years to finish my MA.
4 years?
Yeah, it took me forever.
Talk about that. Why did it take you so long? No, but like, I've been having this discussion a lot with my fellow master's students about the intense pressure we are under to finish this degree, right? Mm-hmm. Like you hear sometimes, a good MA is a finished MA,
same with
all of this sort of thing.
The dissertation is a finished dissertation.
And I think people have a lot of anxiety around the time frame that they finish. So to hear that you took 4 years, I mean,
That was a choice, but I mean, of course, there's a cost to that choice in terms of being indebted and everything.
Right, yes.
You can't finance an MA 4 years.
Right.
That's not something that you can do.
At the same time?
So, no, at that point, actually, let me think. No, I worked all my BA, but when I went to the MA, I really wanted to focus. I actually took many classes in different disciplines that I didn't need to, but I felt like I was missing part of it. Also, I don't know if I should talk about that, but anyways, I'm going to sound weird right now. But anyways, I never thought I would do an MA. Like, I never even thought I would go into graduate studies.
Yeah.
But at the end of but at the end of my BA, one person who was actually doing her PhD in anthropology and was teaching some courses that I took. Mm-hmm. She was like the age of my mom, basically. And she taught those courses in a very pluricultural, I don't even know how to put that, but anyway, kind of a complexity and plurality kind of approach. Yeah. And it was really interesting. And a group of us students who took classes with her were really interested in trying to change what we teach at the university. So basically the bottom line was how we're always kept into Western theories and knowledges, and we don't take into account, for example, I don't know, different. So one of us was working in Togo, and so she was more working in West Africa, and one of us, anyway. So there was from different places, and how there's a lot of knowledge coming from these places, and we don't teach them at the university. Basically.
Right.
So it was kind of the debate that we were having, and we all decided to go into religious studies because. This was a new program at a faculty that was changing from a theological faculty to open to different programs, including the religious studies program. So it was supposed to be open and wanting to go towards plurality, diversity, all of these things.
Beyond just sort of like a Christian Judeo sort of template. Yeah.
So we decided that could be like a good place to like foster maybe some changes and like some ideas that we had.
I love it.
Kind of crazy, right?
No, it sounds amazing.
I'm going to go and change like the program that doesn't exist yet.
Wow.
So, but we were a group of us, and there was that person who was doing her PhD. So she mentored us for a few years, and she actually convinced me into doing a MA because I really wasn't going to do that. I thought I was going to go into international cooperation, whatever. I didn't know what I was going to do, but certainly didn't envision academic
a life in the academy.
Yeah. No, that wasn't, my 20 me wasn't thinking about these things at all.
Yeah.
So I don't even... So I guess that's partly why it took me 4 years. Like, this was a new discipline. We were trying to, like, push for different perspectives. So also, I guess, shout out to my supervisors, because we had a lot of conversation and, like, not easy ones.
Right, because you were figuring things out as you went along. Right?
And, like, they, and so... And I came in with, like, a super broad project, as usual, like... way too big. I wanted to do, so I was working on worldviews, and I wanted to compare like indigenous worldviews from here and the Andes.
Okay.
Wow. It was way too big, and
right.
And so anyway, but I ended up writing my thesis is about it's based on Spaniards' chronicles of the 16th century in the Andes, and actually analyzing how the development of a colonial narrative and worldview in that context, and how the building of like the self and the other in that, the other being in my dissertation at least, the Incas, and other indigenous nations, but mainly the Incas, because that's, with whom the Spaniards were kind of engaging at that point. Anyway, and how they built like those spheres of intellectual, religious, and political spheres of like inferiority and superiority between the Spaniards and the... Anyway, I'm going way too much into detail.
It's great. It's great.
But, and I guess that's where I come from when I talk about like colonialism and all of these things. Like, that's kind of my background.
Gotcha.
And my project now... I guess it also all came out of that, the whole idea of like changing the education and everything. What my goal is to learn from indigenous higher education. What are they doing? What is the work that they're doing? What kind of knowledge they're building? And how can we learn from that and then apply it to like anthropology, sociology, and to decolonize what we're teaching?
So who has been teaching you those things now at this point in your journey?
At this point in my journey?
Yeah, like, so you said you went to the States. You were doing work in the States.
Yes. So I did some work. So I should begin, though, with the Mautaihuasi in Ecuador, because this is the indigenous university with whom I worked, too. And they were the first indigenous university that I really met. And again, I was talking with their president or dean. I'm not sure what category it fits, because they have a different kind of structure. But anyway, Fernando Sarango, and I met with him the first time in 2010, and I was like, wow, an indigenous university based on like indigenous epistemologies and blah, blah. I was really impressed and like, that's great. And again, he looks at me and he's like, yeah, but you have indigenous universities in Canada. And I was like, what? And again, like, it took me being there and like having someone to put in my face my ignorance. And I was like, really? And then he told me about the First Nation University. And then that's when, I was like, oh, I'm so ignorant. So that also sparked my interest for more research and stuff for my PhD. So the indigenous university in Ecuador, the Mautaihuasi, Luis Fernando Sarango is one of the person with whom I've been working, and it's been kind of an inspiration. Also, Luis Macas, who's another indigenous leader in Ecuador, and he's from the ICSI, the Instituto Científico de las Culturas Indígenas, means the Indigenous Cultures Scientific Institute, I guess. And they're the ones who actually worked to put forward a project of an indigenous universities in the 90s, and that were able to fight to have it actually existing in Ecuador. So I've been working with him pretty closely with him, the ICSI, and his wife too, Alicia Lacasela. And so these are like people in Ecuador at least that really help me think through things, and always great support. And then in the U.S., I've worked in Montana and Arizona, and I have people over there that really. One of my friend in Montana, she Michael Munson, she teaches in a tribal college.
Okay.
She's Salish, and she teaches at the Salish Kootenai Tribal College, which is one of the tribal colleges that I visited.
In Montana?
In Montana.
Okay.
So all of these different people, and different people also at Montana State University in the Native American Studies program that really supported me and helped me think things through. There's so many people. I'm not gonna go through the list.
You can go through a huge list.
But definitely, and I remain in touch with them, and
So here are some
yes.
maybe ridiculous questions,
Oh.
but okay. So this is something I struggle with, is the difference between epistemology and ontology.
Right.
So what's the difference?
The difference, so there's different, we were just talking about that yesterday.
Yeah.
There are different definitions. So again, I'm going to say something, someone might say, this is not how we define it. But
right.
Again, I think I was talking with a friend who was like, this is not, ontology is being in the world. And I was like, oh, okay. This is a philosophical kind of perspective on it. My perspective, which comes more from methodology, and especially also I've been reading a lot Sean Wilson, who's Cree from Canada, and he's worked on research is ceremony is one of his books. Anyway. And ontology is what is. So what is the reality? What is the reality composed of? Is reality made of entities, fixed entities, or is it made of relations, or is it made of is it fluctual? Is there one reality, or is there multiple realities?
Right.
So there's all of these questions, what is reality? Whereas epistemology is how do you know, how do you get to know reality?
Okay.
But they go together, because if you define reality in a certain way, you're going to adapt the way you think you can know about it different ways. Right. But there's still, but you could have the same ontology and yet having different epistemologies, depending, for example, do you believe that the old debate about objectivity and subjectivity?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So this is part of epistemology. Can you know the reality in an objective way or not?
Right.
And if so, what kind of so
let me ask you then, have you and so you came into this with your sort of upbringing and your education that you received in sort of the colonial Canadian educational system, and then you're sort of learning other modes of knowing or learning from other cultures, from Indigenous culture specifically. So what can you talk about some tensions maybe in your own sort of confronting these new ways of thinking that were challenging for you?
Yeah. I think one of the things, and I was, so in the class I'm teaching, there's one class that I talk about how do we know what we know? Mm-hmm. And so we talk about epistemologies and ontologies. It's one of the first class that I give in the semester, because to me, before we get to talking about the knowledge that we have in anthropology or whatever, it's important to just begin with asking ourselves, how do we know what we know, and situate anthropology in a Western epistemology, but saying that there's other possibilities. And so I also present Indigenous authors and their take on epistemology, like Manuel Niemeyer and Wilson and Kovac and others.
Right.
Anyway, so this is a funny story, I think, personally. So one exercise that I did this year in terms of how do we know what we know is that I put a box on the table, and it was a black box with inside there was some kind of tea. I didn't even know what it was. It was just hanging out in my office, and I was like, I'm going to use that.
Or loose tea?
No, loose tea.
Okay.
But anyway, so I used that, and I put it on the table, and I asked my students, so what would you do to get to know what's in the box?
Yes.
Right. So we began talking, and there's that, some people will, I would open it, look at it, or I would ask you this. So I was like trying to make a parallel with how we develop knowledge and saying, like, for example, if you're asking me, this is an kind of authority claim, or if you look at it, then it's observation. And some people are like, oh, I would taste it, I would smell it. And I was like, okay, but like if you smell it and then say, oh, smells like oranges, because someone said that. Yeah. It's like then you're referring to your experience of what are oranges in terms. Anyway.
Okay.
And so then there were some people. Oh, this is tea, and then someone was like, well, actually, I don't think I see leaves in it, so it's not tea. And so then we had a debate of like, how do you define what is tea? So then I was like, this is what happens like in science, Yes. And we debate, and there's like theories, and then so how do you prove? And so, anyway, that was kind of my way to have them question. How do they know what they know?
Yes,
and absolutely. I'm working with Elizabeth Fass, who's Métis and professor at the Applied Human Sciences here at Concordia. Okay. And she's giving a class. And anyway, I was kind of helping her a little bit with like preparing her class. And I mentioned that exercise that I did. And I was like, you could use it, and she did. But, of course, she transformed it.
Of course.
And so, anyway, I went to another event where she was, and she used the exercise in her way. But the way she used it was like she had a beaded bag, and there was something in the bag, and she asked people, like, how would they do to know what's inside? But the way she questioned it really changed the whole perspective. And, like, people were like, oh, well, I would look inside of it. And so she answered, so you would take it from my hands, open it, and look inside of it?
Oh, wow.
And then the person was like, well, I don't know, maybe not. And she was like, well, maybe if you would have like a good relationship with me, you could ask me. And so she like really transformed the whole thing. And I was listening to her and I was like, oh my God. So if you would have filmed what I have done in my class and then filmed what she's done and put them like, side to side, you would see, I think, exactly the difference between like a Western approach and an Indigenous approach. Like to me, that was like really, I was like, oh my God, I should have filmed that. Like that would be perfect. Like mine was a box on a table in front of the class. Anyway, it was like so funny. But yeah, to me, like that really speaks to the difference. I think that's the best.
For sure.
Like, I think.
Yeah, that personally. Is a great story. Yeah. It totally like transforms the way you think about that exercise, right? That's so cool. Yeah. smizing. No smizing. Stop. Not even with your eyes. Don't even do it. So, that song was Stained Glass by my most favorite band in the whole wide world, No Fly List. And this may shock you, but our wonderful producer, Kris Millett, is in No Fly List, and we are featuring their music this episode. So that song, Stained Glass, also has a 360-degree music video, which I just found out. If you have a smartphone, you can watch this music video, and you can control the view that you are seeing in the video. Like, this is like... The future is now, people, and it is 360-degree music videos. You can also find out all about their band on noflylistmusic.com. And the band will be playing in Montreal at Casa del Popolo July 6th this summer, so make sure you go and check them out and support some local music. Next up, I was joined in the lab by Sarah Breitkreutz, who is also a PhD student in the social and cultural analysis program like Marie-Eve, who joined me to talk about her work, and we started talking about her research using sound as a method.
My PhD research is connected to a community-based participatory research project with the Montreal Inuit community. Mm-hmm. And long story short, I am working with the Inuit community on a community radio show called Nipivut. So,
sorry, called what?
Nipivut.
Nipivut. Okay.
It means our voice in Inuktitut, which I do not speak very well or at all. But that's what it is. And so I've just been kind of I have lots of stuff to say about this, but maybe we can come back to that afterwards.
Absolutely.
If you want to talk about sound studies. So I never thought that I would study radio, but kind of this project happened, and it seemed like it would benefit from having a dedicated graduate student to kind of be around and support it, because community radio takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. I mean, you all are having the experience of getting a podcast started.
Yes.
You understand. So I've just been kind of helping behind the scenes with it for the last year and a half. It's been running for a little over a year and a half.
Based out of Montreal?
Yeah, on CKUT.
Great.
90.3 FM.
What time?
6 p.m. on Tuesdays, but every other Tuesday.
Every other Tuesday?
Yeah, it's only every 2 weeks, yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah, so I never thought I would study radio, but I started looking into the literature on it and became instantly fascinated. Mm-hmm. And I did have a pre-existing interest in sort of sound art and sound, like using sonic methods in ethnography.
Yes, because we took a class together and we went on a tour of Pointe Saint-Charles, and it was part of, I can't remember what the project was, but you were the voice of that walking tour.
Yes, it's slightly embarrassing, yeah.
No, it's not embarrassing. It was awesome. It was so fun. Mm-hmm. That was one of the highlights of that class, which was an amazing class, sidebar, but shout out to JP Warren. But so you have done some of this stuff in the past and used sound as sort of like a research tool. Right,
that's right. So that was a class that was, it was the first year of this kind of experimental class run by Stephen High and a couple of other professors. I should look up their names. I should know them. But it was a joint class. So there were three classes from three different departments. There was an oral history class taught by Stephen High. There was a neighborhood theater class, and there was an art history class. And they all came together. They got some kind of a grant for like curriculum innovation and tried to do this thing where they were all scheduled on the same day. And it was all about community-based learning in Pointe Saint-Charles, which is a neighborhood in southwest Montreal.
Yes.
Which is of interest, I mean, for lots of reasons, but especially because it's kind of a post-industrial neighborhood. It was a working-class neighborhood with lots of factories for a long time around the Lachine Canal. Obviously, that has been changing. It's kind of, there's this ongoing battle with gentrification.
Right.
Lots of really interesting issues. And they had this bank. So Stephen High is the founder of the Oral History Center for Oral History and Digital Storytelling at Concordia.
Okay.
Which is a fantastic resource. We should put a link. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. We will link to that. I'm like, oh yeah, we need links to all these things. We're going to link to that radio show. We're going to link to the Oral History Center. Yes.
Oh, the internet. So they had like a number of sort of research projects around Point St. Charles.
Right.
One of them was conducting a bunch of oral history interviews with residents of the neighborhood. So they had this bank of oral history interviews with actually some software that was developed specifically for them. So it was kind of easily accessible, and it's a software interface that lets you kind of go through listen to the oral history interviews and kind of tag them and like write notes and keep all this metadata with the interview. It's very cool. It's very cool. I forget what it's called. Anyway, but it's really great. And so they had this bank of oral history interviews, and our job in the oral history class was to learn about Point St. Charles. We went to Point St. Charles every week.
Yep.
We met in the Share the Warmth Center and learned about the history of the neighborhood, and then started listening to these interviews and sort of curated and edited them into a walking tour of the neighborhood.
Right.
Which was very cool.
And which was what I experienced when I went.
Yes.
It was very cool.
Yeah?
Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah?
The stories were really incredible. It was really cool to hear the voices of the people in the neighborhood. And then just sort of like on a like really basic, like technical, like, you know, like it was so well timed. You know, like it was like, okay, like it was just a really smoothly done project, which I appreciated.
Right.
And also, like, as somebody not from Montreal, it was like amazing to get to hear some of that history and like be in the neighborhood, hearing the voices of those people, seeing the neighborhood and experiencing the neighborhood as you're doing it. Like, it was such an immersive project. It was really cool. So,
yeah. Oh, thanks for saying that. I mean, and it's available. You can go to the Point St. Charles Library and sign it out.
Right.
And like with a little audio player, so anyone who wants to go listen to it can. It's funny that you say it was smoothly timed, because it took a really long time and lots of iteration, like lots of back and forth to get everything to line up, and because it's not geolocated, like it's not a locative media thing, where it knows where you are.
It's going to take you 5 minutes to walk to this next place.
We just like, it was a lot of trial and error, but the people who were working on it did a really fantastic job, the sound engineers and stuff. Anyway, so that was kind of my first big project that was related to, you know, sound, and then I initially wanted to do something kind of like that, take from that experience and transpose it into an Inuit Montreal Inuit context, because I thought it might be a really interesting sort of decolonizing tool as well. I also found it really powerful to kind of walk through a space and hear the voices of people overlaid. There's something about that, being able to listen to people talk about a space simultaneously with being in the space, that helps you redefine that space for yourself and kind of overlay it with different narratives. And anyway, so I was interested in doing something kind of like that with Montreal Inuit. But before I was able to organize that, the radio show came along and needed support, and actually I think in a lot of ways it is accomplishing, it fulfills a lot of my, I'm very lucky because it fulfills a lot of my interests about, you know, about storytelling and about sound-based narrative and all this kind of stuff, and it is very, it's local. It's interesting because it's local in that it's broadcast from CKUT, and you can, there's something I think really powerful about just being able to turn, you know, your radio dial. Nobody has a dial on their radio anymore, but to tune in Montreal to something on the airwaves and to hear Inuktitut being spoken. And Inuit who have worked on the show and who've listened to the show have told us that's really powerful to be able to hear their language on the radio in Montreal. So it's very local in some ways, but in another way, it's because of the shifting nature of radio as a medium and the sort of the birth of podcasting.
Absolutely.
And online streaming and everything. It also is very available in lots of different places. And so we have listeners to the show. There were some stats that just came out. I should have checked them. But we have people listening to the show from all over the world.
Amazing.
And I mean, most notably the Canadian Arctic.
Right.
But lots of other places too. Greenland.
Oh, cool.
Places in the States. People listen to it on many different continents, and we don't really know like what their story. We'd love to find out why they're listening and who they are. Yeah.
What's bringing you to this show?
Yeah. But anyway, it's very cool to see radio, and the fact that it's an oral medium, a sonic medium, is important because it's much easier to stream that if you have like a low, like if your internet connection is not super fast, it's much easier to stream audio than video. Mm-hmm. It's relatively accessible. It's pretty cheap to produce.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So lots of like practical benefits from doing it that way.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Oh, so many tangents. But there are practical benefits to radio in terms of its like materiality and its production costs and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But also there's a cultural resonance, I think, if I can say that, or a social resonance. It seems to be. This is what Inuit have told me for Inuit listening to the show, because every community in the north has a local community radio station, and so people are used to sort of listening to the radio. It's a practice that kind of makes sense, and so when they come, my friend Payungi Nutagaluk, who's one of our contributors and has done so much great work for the show, she works for Avatak Cultural Institute, and she told me once that when Inuit come down to the south, to Montreal, for whatever reason, there are lots of reasons. I mean, that's a whole other topic about why people come down. For her, anyway, when she comes down, the first thing she notices is that she can't just turn on the radio and hear the local radio station. And she said to me...
Meaning her local radio station?
Yeah. She's used to being able to kind of just do that, back home.
Yeah.
And she said it's something that, she said, we feel it in our bodies when we can't listen, or when we do listen and we hear that language being spoken. It's kind of an embodied material experience,
right?
That's very powerful. So I think,
wow.
Anyway, so there are lots of... Nipivut is a very, very cool project. I feel really, really lucky to be part of it. I am a very small part of it. I mean, most of it is it's produced and sort of designed and put together by Inuit from the community. There's one non-Inuk co-producer, David Murphy, and Kevin Tigivik is the other co-producer, who's from Iqaluit, and Annie Pisukti, who's also from Iqaluit, is our host.
Okay.
And then
I was just going to ask you, is it like so you have one host?
Yeah. Well, so it's shifting all the time.
Yeah.
Annie's the host. Kevin and David are the producers. We do most of our stuff pre-recorded because Annie, just because of availabilities and stuff, when people can be in the studio. But we'd like to shift eventually to a more live show. Eventually, it's less work actually to produce a live show. It's maybe more engaging for people to listen to. But so Kevin and David speak on air sometimes as well, because they kind of have to be in the studio playing the pre-recorded clips, but giving them some context, and they've developed a little kind of banter thing that they do, and Kevin switches back and forth between Inuktitut and English.
Oh, cool.
It's really cool to listen to.
And so what sort of segments or content are you guys producing for the show? Are you like just talking about local stuff or interviewing people? It's
mostly talk radio. Yeah, it's mostly interviews. And it's, really the idea is that it's anything that might be of interest to Inuit living in Montreal. Which is pretty broad. Yeah. But so there's so we play Inuit music. There's so much amazing Inuit music out there. And so that's all of the music that we play on the show is produced by Inuit. Interviews with politicians, interviews with just local Inuit who have a story that they want to share, interviews with local institutions like Ivirtavik, which is an employment center, or Avatak Cultural Institute, which I mentioned, or... there's sort of, or if there's a story that, comes out that is related to Inuit interests, we'll see if we can find someone to interview. So,
and so, how did you get involved in this podcast? What was your connection?
It was through
to the radio show. Sorry.
Yeah, it was through the this larger research project. It's a SSHRC-funded research project. That my supervisor, Mark Watson, who's in the department, is running. Okay. That is aimed at it's community-based participatory research. Right. So we have a community advisory board, and we got funding from SSHRC. But the idea is that, so the basic premise is to try to understand what the situation is like for Inuit who are living in Montreal, and why there is such a disparity between Inuit the services that are available for Inuit in Montreal and the services that are available in, for example, Ottawa, which is only a couple hours away, and also Ottawa has the largest urban population of Inuit living there, and they have a pretty wide variety of services. They have Inuit daycare, they have a health center, they have lots of things provided, and Montreal relatively has quite little. It's getting better, but so that was kind of like the initial question that fueled the research: is what's the history of Montreal, of Inuit coming to Montreal, and why is there this dearth of institutional support?
Right.
But because it's community-based, the idea was that we just kind of see what happened and see what was of interest to the local community. And so my friend and colleague, Stefan Pushkash, was kind of working as an RA as well on this project. He's an Inuk from, I forget where that's terrible. I'll look it up. Okay. He was talking with Mark Watson, and just kind of like floated this idea of a radio show. And they looked into it and found out there was actually a lot of interest, and that in the past Inuit have asked for a community radio show when there have been needs assessments done and things like that. So it just seemed like kind of a good idea. Cool. Stefan largely made it happen with the support of CKUT. And one of the other hosts on CKUT, Urquhart, who hosts Native Solidarity News, gave up half of his time. He gave us one out of every 2 weeks to broadcast. And so anyway, a lot of things came together to make it work.
And so I just want to backtrack a little bit and take a sidetrack onto this idea of a community advisory board working on a SSHRC project. So, can you just tell me a little bit, like, who makes up the community advisory board? What's their sort of role in this project? So it's not something I'm super familiar with or I've worked in that sort of way before. Yeah,
I hesitate to say too much specifically about our project just because I would want... Like Mark would be the person to talk to about that, since he's kind of the one who's in touch. But I know that he sends. So we have a community advisory board. They all signed off on the SSHRC proposal. They are. I couldn't list them all offhand, but they're people like representatives from Makivik, which is the Inuit Development Corporation, representatives from Avatak, Culture Institute. One of the people who was actually instrumental in starting the SSHRC process, like in getting the grant application off the ground and everything, was she was a former student at Concordia and she's originally from Sadluit. Her name is Barbara Papigatuk, so she was very instrumental. So I think we've got like maybe a dozen members on this advisory board. Okay. And the idea is that Mark gives quarterly reports or something like that, periodically back to this advisory board to kind of let them know what the project is up to, and to elicit feedback and to sort of make sure that what we're doing is in people's best interests, and to kind of maintain some accountability with the community. So, and we've done our best to hire as many Inuit research assistants as possible, as well. So there are lots of ways in which we're trying to make it sort of as engaged with the community as possible. Right.
And then what's your role on the podcast? Are you kind of like a producer? Is that sort
of okay, this is a good question. This is an interesting thing. This is another thing that might be of interest to people who are grad students interested in community-based research. It becomes a little murky. I think if you're designing your own research project, I think it's a little bit easier to sort of follow the steps or to go through the process of the program as it's laid out. So we're supposed to do our coursework, and then we're supposed to do our comps and our thesis proposal, and then we're supposed to do our research, a year of research or whatever, and then we're supposed to write up. But when the radio show started happening, I was just finishing up I still had coursework to finish. Right. And it's taken me a very long time, as I mentioned, to get my comps out of the way. It's still going to take more time because I'm going to take some time off with the baby. Yeah. But the radio show is happening now, so I can't, there's this kind of weird. So I'm a research assistant with the Nunalii project, which is that's the bigger SSHRC funded project. Okay. And so I guess I'm sort of working with the radio show technically under the auspices of the larger project. Right. with the idea that eventually it will become part of my PhD research.
Okay.
But I haven't done my thesis proposal. I haven't done a separate ethics thing for just that.
I was going to ask you, is the thesis proposal going to be about the radio show or like?
Yeah, I think so. But then the question will be, it'll just be a matter of when I finally get around to that stage, figuring out what the radio show needs at that time, like how I can best contribute as a dedicated researcher who'll be around for at least a year, kind of doing full-time research. What stage the radio show is at? What kind of, because there have been lots of stages. Like at the beginning, we just needed to like survive, and produce enough content that we always had a show.
Yep.
We scrambled a little bit sometimes. Yes, you know what it feels like.
We're familiar with that storyline.
And then we started to wonder, like, are people actually listening to the show?
Right.
You know.
Where do you get your analytics from?
Like it's very difficult to get analytics for the live show, like the people listening live.
Yeah.
Online, it's not as hard. Like on SoundCloud, we have everything on SoundCloud, and so you can see. You don't have data for all the listeners, but for some of them. And we also broadcast on isuma.tv, which is a kind of a repository of audio and video content for the North, for Inuit. So we get some numbers from that. But it's hard to say. And so a couple of times we've done live call-in shows, and like people have called in. Mm-hmm. So that's a good sign.
Yeah.
The phones haven't been ringing off the hook, so we would still like more people to call in. But anyway, and now it seems like we're kind of at the stage where we need to do some evaluation of the program and think about how to expand. And there are other cities as well in Canada that are interested in our experience and maybe doing something similar. And so we're doing a workshop. Actually, we're doing a workshop at Casca at the Canadian Anthropological Society annual meeting. That's at the beginning of May in Ottawa. We're going to be doing a workshop for Inuit youth, Inuit students, on radio production. I mean, technically it's open to everybody, so anyone can come. Mm-hmm. But the idea there is maybe to kickstart something in Ottawa, which would be really cool.
Yeah, super cool. How could folks get involved in that? If they want to?
I think they can just go probably to the Casca website.
Sorry, that was a Canadian
Anthropological Society.
People know. Kris or Marie.
And then the CA is the French part, Société Canadienne d'Anthropologie, or whatever. Anyway, so they've got. You can look up the information about the conference, and there's an Inuit radio workshop listed.
Cool.
So,
what are you guys going to talk about in the workshop?
We're going to talk about some stuff about radio and about Nipivut, but we're going to produce something. That's the idea. That's why it's a workshop,
Amazing.
Right? So we're going to actually go through like basic interview techniques, and then hopefully get some students maybe interviewing conference delegates, or talking to people about their research, or talking to each other. It doesn't really matter, whatever people are interested in. Yeah. Just so they have that experience of producing some audio. To find out how easy it is, and to build some confidence, and then
and they can take it and go and do their own thing.
Yeah, exactly. Because people like anyone can make a podcast.
Yeah,
almost. I shouldn't say anyone.
We're living proof.
It's not perfectly accessible. Obviously, you need a computer.
Yes.
And you need a recording device. But honestly, like a cell phone is fine to record on. Like the bar is very low for being able to produce something.
Yeah.
Pretty high quality. So anyway, eventually, so right now I'm kind of, I have called myself in the past an assistant producer.
Okay.
But I really try to work behind the scenes. I did a lot of audio editing of the episodes in the first little while when it was just me and Stefan working on it. Now that Kevin and David are the co-producers, they're pretty self-sufficient. Yeah. And also I've been trying to focus on getting the other academic components of my PhD out of the way.
Right.
But I mean, I go to the radio station when we broadcast and just kind of hang out there, and try to make myself available
support.
Just any kind of logistical support.
So, did you bring in some of that technical, like editing, for example, like audio editing? Did you bring some of those skills with you into this project? Was that something you just learned on the fly? Or?
No, I totally learned it on the fly.
Cool.
I just watched YouTube tutorials about Audacity.
Well, and this is why it is so accessible, right? Because you can just, everything's just there. People can make stuff happen. It's so cool.
Audacity is free software. The YouTube tutorials are very accessible. I have gotten support as well from, I should shout out to Matt Damour.
So he was supporting you with some of this technical
Well, he told me how to compress audio.
Oh, okay.
Effectively, which was extremely useful.
Yeah.
So thanks, Matt.
Yeah, shout out. Well, that is another episode of Best Concordia podcast. I want to thank our guests this week, Marie-Eve Drouin Gagne and Sarah Breitkreutz. Thank you guys so much for coming to talk to us. The music this week was by No Fly List and Kris Millett, our fabulous producer. And I was joined here in the studio with Kris and Anne-Marie Turcotte. As always, we'd like to thank the Ethnography Lab and the Speculative Life Research Cluster for hosting us. And we will see y'all next week. Bye, everybody.
Good job, everyone.
Way to go. Gold star.
You moved the entire time on this table.
I can't help it. I like to move. I'm fidgety.
Do this.
I can't. Really?
You were like this.
I need a straight jacket. I'm animated.